Good afternoon. My name is Horst. I'm fully aware that I'm standing between you and lunch, so I will promise you that I'll keep this short and sweet. This is a premiere for me. I have never been to Serbia before, and I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been asked last week to jump in for one of my colleagues who, for personal reasons, couldn't make it. So unfortunately, Belgrade, well, I will see Belgrade for 2 hours on my way in from the airport and then leaving, but nevertheless, I'm still very, very happy to be here. So what I'd like to do today is to give you a quick overview on who Intel Capital is and how we see the world from our perspective in terms of activities, investments, and once I'm done and the lunch break starts, I'll still be here for a few minutes. So, should you have any questions or would you like to engage in any chat, I'll be certainly very happy to do that. So I'm pretty sure that most of you are aware of who Intel is, world leader in microchips. In 1991, they formed Intel Capital originally just as doing investments for Intel. So there were some organizational, financial, what have you reasons that Intel did not have the expertise when they said, well, we need to buy something or we need to invest in something. How do we do the financial diligence? How do we understand what's going on organizationally? We need to basically set up a business unit that understands how to analyze these companies and make sure that they are in the appropriate standing that they could collaborate with Intel. Well, we must have done something right because, 20 years later, we are still existing. And not only that, we still do some investments purely for Intel. And in fact, they are so confidential that even I, as Intel Capital, typically do not know about them. But the main sort of public objective that we do is one that you would expect from any venture capital organization, generating profits. But secondly, also help Intel strategically to accelerate their products. So I'll give you a good example. You probably are all familiar with the Ultrabooks. That is actually a name that has been trademarked by Intel. So it's an Intel term, those super thin notebooks. And Intel was asking the question, given the tablets and the smartphones, well, why would people even buy notebooks and Ultrabooks? And so they gave Intel Capital a charter, go out and look at what applications cannot really run well on tablets because they are too thin, or smartphones because they are too small, but that would be compelling for notebooks. So Intel Capital went out and we started to look and eventually invest in companies that do speech recognition, that do eye tracking, where instead of the mouse, you use your eyes. I mean, I can tell you, I tried this. It is just absolutely amazing how precise the computer cameras can reflect what you do, where you look with your eyes, and basically translate it into applications. Gesture recognition. So just think of markets for handicapped people, for computer illiterate people, maybe kids. Just like they, you see how with the fingers they basically, immediately learn the tablets. We see the same scenario for Ultrabooks. But this is just the consumer side of the house, or one example. You could go the other example. Now, everybody is not only do people talk about cloud computing, many corporates, established corporates, are actually successfully using cloud. But what does that mean? That has huge implications on security, reliability, manageability. So Intel, that powers many of the cloud data centers, we work hand in hand with Amazon, Google, many of the big server farms that today in the world have actually Intel processors. But in order for Intel to stay successful in the enterprise, they again chartered us and said, well, look at what is needed in assuring the corporates that the data is safe and available. And so we have done a bunch of investments in security, in communication software and hardware, in, as I said before, things like, availability scalability, manageability, reliability. So you see in this little chart, and that is sometimes a stretch, I'll be honest. I mean, it's always good to have a rich, fat mother called Intel, and as long as Intel is doing well, we are doing well. But at the same time, we are also expected not only to generate profits, but to help Mother Intel to be successful. And so this little chart depicts that, you see many of our investments. We currently have about 400 companies in our portfolio. So many of those are mostly financial plays. Many of them are mostly strategic plays, and the sweet spot, of course, would be in the middle. We are, and especially for the entrepreneurs here in the room, we are stage agnostic. So we will not invest in concepts, meaning we only invest in companies that have concrete products, and ideally they have already customers or at least prototypes out there. But it could be as small as, I believe our smallest investments have been around $500,000 in the first round, and they could go as big as, I believe the biggest one is probably in several rounds over $2 billion. So we are pretty much open to anything and everything. I guess we proudly concluded a deal last year in the 54th or 55th country. So, we are also country agnostic, so to speak. Or in fact, right now, and that's probably remarkable for an American company, today about 60% of the investments are generated outside of the U.S. So, I don't think we have anything in Serbia yet, but, maybe we'll get an opportunity here. So, just quickly give you, well, I mentioned that basically where we go with the investments, but let me give you a few numbers, provided I can. I'll come back to the other slide. So we have invested since 91 in over 1,300 companies. Many of them have gone public. Many of them were merged or acquired by other companies, which ultimately, at least from a financial point of view, is our objective. Actually, it's 54 countries, as I see. As you see, that's actually the historical percentage is just quote unquote 37%, but the last few years is, as I said, about 60% of the investments are actually generated outside of the US. And we were very proud that 2 years ago we finally crossed the $10 billion mark in terms of overall investments. Now, where do we invest? Obviously, we also, partially because of Intel's charters, partially, of course, because we also look what's out there in the market, what's interesting, what are disruptive technologies. I make no secret, Intel certainly wasn't too happy when the smartphones and the tablets, made their foray into the classical computer arena. But certainly Intel Capital has always been on the lookout for solutions that would not only benefit the classical PC or the classical computer, but that would be disruptive technologies. So again, we are also investing in applications for smartphones. We are doing a lot of stuff in education that is still mostly classical computer-based, but new ways of how people get educated, especially when it goes to online or remote education. One of the companies we have just recently closed is a company called Personify. And what they do, they study your face, how you look. And, the first schools in Russia, in remote areas, Siberia, etc., where it's not that easy to get teachers, they are studying this now by saying, well, if the student sits in front of the computer, I can see from the frown, from the smile, from the, tears, how potentially my lessons reflect on the student. So it's very, very interesting to see how many of the classical, not only technologies, but also things how we used to do things, whether it's education, whether it's social engagement. You look at things like corporate social networks. We think social networks, yeah, that's Facebook, that's Twitter. No. There is many companies. I recently talked to BMW. They put a lot of emphasis on social networks so that they get the knowledge transfer within the employees, where people not on a structured basis, which many people resent, but where people would just freely exchange ideas. And all of a sudden, you would increase the base of innovation in the company. So, massively interesting. It's one of the areas that we have invested since many years to say, well, social networks is more than just what you and I are using. So, there is a bunch of stuff that we do. We also then have some vertical investments. I mentioned Ultrabooks. I mentioned tablets, computer wearables. Huge thing now. We have recently invested in a company that has these headbands that measures body temperature, and this little company has just signed a contract with the US Olympic Committee to basically get their athletes, as they train, this little thing basically monitors all your or many of your corporate, of your vital functions, because apparently that's quite common. I didn't know that athletes suffer of heat strokes. And they have been overheating for a while until that happens. Now, these little things not only measure it, but by remote, like the Formula One cars to the pit, they transfer all the data live or real time to whatever central command stands, and you can actually measure the overall health of the athletes. So this whole wearable, I mean, I'm sure many of you have seen the Samsung commercial that now you can do email on your little watch, but what we see that these wearables will go far beyond that, where it will, it also goes to a certain extent into digital health, that you could actually take remotely the blood pressure, whether, instead of, again, think of some place in Siberia where maybe you have an old person that has not an immediate access to the doctor. How can the doctor, at least for quote-unquote simple things, understand how that person is feeling and give online or over the phone, based on whatever is transmitted from whatever you wear on your body, give some advice what to do. So, hugely interesting. And then you go to the boring and the infrastructural stuff like the cloud computing, big data. If you talk to banks today, I mean, they are pulling their hair because they don't understand anymore what to do with the data. Right? They have already so much, and yet many of the banks will actually admit to you that they don't understand the customers enough, and they don't understand why a customer goes from my bank to another bank. So this whole customer relationship management becomes a thing. Now, the more I get from the customer and I transmit to the customer, the more data I generate. Where does all the stuff go? We just believe very often, well, yeah, computer technology, everything is possible. Now we can store terabytes. Well, fair enough, you store those terabytes. But once you have these huge data volumes, what do you need to do to quickly retrieve it? The whole, the bandwidth. I mean, how do you compress the data that you get it still in a reasonable time if it's stored somewhere offsite? So it all sounds boring, and it's classical backbone business, but it's hugely important, for companies to survive. We did just, a snapshot where we are in 2013. Sorry about, I just see this one number gets slightly twisted. So you see that's the first half. We have done about 42% of the investments outside of the US. We had already 13 acquisitions. Some of these companies might ring a bell, some of those might not. So I'm not going to bore you. It's interesting. I mean, some of the companies, I'm not sure we have here. I'll show you the one that shows the history. So we invested in BlackBerry. Luckily for us, we got out on time. We invested in Linux, both in Red Hat. I believe SUSE isn't even on here. I personally met a company that was very interesting, MySQL. When we were invested in them, they were the fastest growing database in the world. Why? Because so many people were tired of paying the licenses to Oracle and IBM, so the non-mission critical departments, even of corporates, would flock to MySQL. They got, as probably they got bought by Sun, and then Sun got bought by Oracle. So now what sort of some companies try to avoid going to Oracle, they're still stuck with Oracle. But anyhow, it was a very, very nice success story. One that is not Serbia, admittedly, but at least close to your region is AVG, a Czech company, which is the third largest antivirus company after McAfee and Symantec. So that was a very, very successful IPO. Again, I don't want to bore you with the list, but there is certainly some of those that are quite notable. We do, as I mentioned, 54 countries. We are country agnostic. We would certainly love, to look at opportunities in Serbia. We have some investments since several years already in the Eastern European region, most notably Poland, Romania. Romania is one of their bigger success stories, a company called Civeco that does a lot of software solutions for government, education, agriculture. They are pretty much present in the world. It's a company that in the meantime I believe has close to 2,000 employees. So certainly you can't call them a startup anymore. But we love them so much that we still keep them in the portfolio. And by the way, that is a nice part as long as we are associated to Intel. If you look at the classical venture capital company, they will turn their investments over typically every 3 to 4 years. Why? Because they need fresh money, right? For us, we are not in a hurry. So there is actually some investments that we have in our portfolio, still in our portfolio since 1993. And if I give you one example that we have invested in a company called Smart Technologies, probably many of you will say, well, who is that? Well, if I tell you that these are the guys that do the intelligent whiteboards that you have in conference rooms where you can scribble and you can print this out and you can email it. We invested in 93 a single-digit $1 million amount. 2 years ago, they did an IPO. We didn't sell all we have. We sold just part for a triple-digit $1 million amount. Now, I wish all of our investments were that successful. Be fair, not all of them are. But, it certainly, patience sometimes pays off if you are not in a hurry and you see there is potential and we keep on investing. And it's quite usual for us that we would invest over 4, maybe even 5 rounds, as long as we see that the company is trending in the right direction. Russia CIS, I mentioned that also there we have a number of companies. Probably the biggest success story is Parallels, that is doing application and desktop virtualization. In the meantime, a company that has transferred or has pretty much their official headquarters almost in the US. Because they are so successful, and a number of others. AlterGeo is doing social networks. Again, a company that is now starting to look outside of Russia due to the demand. So many of these investments look pretty promising. And, we are, of course, proud, no bragging. I know it's a marketing slide, but, recently we got some nice accolades as the corporate venture, top corporate venture company of the year. So it's certainly also nice, to see the outside recognition. What I do here, so Intel Capital, one thing is obviously we do investments, that's clear. But one of the things that I find very gratifying, and this is my role actually, because of our big mother company and because of the fact that Intel practically calls on every company in the world, what we do, we offer the companies we have invested in to take them to big corporates like BMW or AT&T or Shell or what have you, so that they can basically pitch their solutions and see if there is some interest, some collaboration between the big corporate and the small company. Now, those of you who have worked or are working for small companies, you know how hard this is when you as a small company try to get in front of a big corporate. At the same time, the big corporates are surprisingly open to meet also small companies, because there is nobody, not even Intel as a technology company, could ever claim that we know every technology in the world. There is always something that crops up somewhere. Let's just stick to Siberia, since I mentioned Siberia several times today. And you would typically not know about that. So for me, that is actually my role in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, that I take always groups of portfolio companies and I take them to the big corporates. And it's sometimes mind-boggling when you see initially these big corporates sort of leaning back, well, what do these small companies have to tell me? And then, 5 minutes later, you see them with open mouths and, their room is silent because they see something that they have not seen like that before. And we have had engagements, or many of these introductions actually led to engagements where the big one would buy from the small one or would embark on some kind of other collaboration. So it's a huge strength that we can offer to the small companies, that we say, giving you money is one thing, but how can we help you grow? And we do 70, 80 of these engagements. I just show you some logos, pretty much the who is who in the world. We have already had these engagements, and it's gratifying because I do not only get to see disruptive technologies presented, but as I said before, I also see how corporates react. People that initially yawn and at the end, are very grateful that they actually got the chance, to meet these small companies. That's pretty much it.